So I grew up in Elkridge, Maryland. It's about 15 minutes outside of Baltimore. Growing up, my family would go to church Christmas and Easter, but outside of that, we didn't go very much. We were a very busy family. We were all involved in sports, and we were all involved in competitive sports. And so every weekend was kind of taken up by those things, and church took a backseat to those. And although we weren't raised in church, we were raised to be very morally correct, very servant-hearted. My dad is a firefighter, my mom's a teacher, and so that was just something that was instilled in us at a very young age. My family was very close growing up. All my dad's family is from the area that I grew up in, and my grandfather and my grandma were our neighbors, and family was something that mattered to us a lot. My grandfather, my papa, John, on my dad's side, he passed away when I was in 8th grade. It was pretty unexpected. One day we got home from school and my dad and my mom sat us down and they were like, your grandfather, he had doctor's appointment yesterday and he went back today, and we found out that he's very sick and he only has 5 days left. I feel like that's something that I only hear about in movies where it's like 5 days left, that's it. But that is exactly what happened. He had 5 days left, and on I think the 5th day he passed away. My grandfather was someone I looked up to greatly. He was this big burly man. He was very involved in the community. He was a veteran, a firefighter, a football player, but to us he was just this big teddy bear. And so within those 5 days I got to learn more about my grandfather than I ever had in my life, because we had so many people come and visit us and bring us food, and family members we hadn't seen in a while, and friends from high school and friends from his time in Vietnam that I had never met, but I got to hear these amazing stories about. But one thing that got talked about in a new light that I had never really thought about before in this way was God, just our salvation in general, and what happens once we do pass away. I remember one night, my Uncle Jason, he came over one night and he went and had a conversation with my grandfather. And so my grandfather was a man who grew up in church. At some point he kind of stopped going every Sunday as well, and he told my Uncle Jason like he didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know where he was going and he was scared. And hearing that shocked me, because like I said, my grandfather was this big man and he was strong and he was a veteran and he was the protector. And so to hear that he was scared of not knowing what was going to happen next, that was kind of like the shock factor. And my Uncle Jason had this talk with him for a really long time. I don't know how long it was, but it ended with my grandfather accepting God as his salvation, and knowing that when he did pass away, it wasn't something to be scared of, but something to look forward to and have this undeniable hope in. And so after they had that conversation, my Uncle Jason came out and talked to me and my siblings and my dad, and kind of just shared about what that looked like and asked us if we had questions, and talked about Christianity in a light that I had never seen it in before. It became much more personal at that moment. And when I went into high school, I definitely was struggling a lot with mental health and struggling with who I was and seeking my worth in a lot of places that I wasn't finding it in. And I was just trying really hard to fit in and do all the right things and be so kind to everyone, so nice, and just be the perfect person, be the athlete, be the smart kid, be the kind person, be the charitable person. And I was giving myself all these roles, and I realized I could never fulfill them perfectly. That all came to kind of this head one night where I was just really down on myself and thinking some really bad things about myself. And I realized, like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I have tried so hard to be perfect, and it's not working, and I don't know what to do, and like I don't know who I am, and just a lot of really big life questions that I was dealing with. And I decided there's only one thing I can find. And like, thinking back to my grandfather, there was one thing that mattered at the end of his life, and that was if he believed in God and if he put his trust into him. And none of the roles that I associated with him, not the plaques on the walls, not the news clippings of the people that he had saved, that's not what got him to heaven. That's not what people were talking about at the end of his life. What they talked about was God. And so I realized, like, that was what I needed to do. I've always been a journaler. I had probably like 7 different diaries when I was a kid. I didn't write in all of them, but I just loved the idea of having a diary. And so I did keep a journal, and it was just a place for me to write down my thoughts and get it out and say things that I didn't think I could say to anyone else. And so the journal that I kept in high school specifically, I would write in it when I was feeling a lot of pain. And so it was filled with a lot of pain and just thoughts about myself that scare me when I read them back. And that was a big moment for me the night when I thought about my grandfather and kind of realized like nothing was going to work, like nothing was going to fulfill me, was reading that journal back and being like, I don't want to think these things about myself ever again. Like, I don't want to think that I'm not going to be enough for anyone. I don't want to think that my worth is in my looks and my appearance and being desired by boys and being just like a desirable friend. And I was just tired of feeling that way, like tired of existing, but not existing with any sort of purpose. Not knowing why I existed and not really caring if I didn't exist because I just didn't think I brought anything good to the table. It was just realizing like that's not what matters. That's not who you are, isn't being desirable for this person or that person, and it's not being a friend to this person or getting an invite to that or being fun enough or being good enough, and that's not what makes up who you are. And so I think when I came to that realization of I was created for a purpose, I was created with intent, with love, I was created in an image of God who made everything that I view as beautiful around me. He created me too, and when he was done creating me, he didn't look at me and say, well, maybe if she was just a little bit more fun, maybe if she was just a little bit more pretty, or if she looked this way. He just looked at me and said, that is beautiful, and I made her. And she is strong and beloved and everything good. I think that's the biggest thing that changed, was finally being able to not see my identity as being the perfect little high school Becky, and finally being able to see myself as beautifully and wonderfully and fearfully made and intricately woven, and just know that a God who I get to call Father created me with such love and such intent, and he has a beautiful plan for my life. Not that it's going to look perfect, but that I am always going to be loved, and I am always going to be able to have hope, and I am always going to be able to have joy that cannot be taken away under no circumstances. So, culturally, it's been very different since I've come to the Bible Belt, where everyone kind of knows about Jesus and knows kind of what's expected. At least at my high school, it was a little different. And so being a Christian wasn't like something that would really affect my lifestyle. Just like, oh, I would pray, I'd read my Bible, that meant I was saved, but God would forgive me time and time again if I continued living the way that I was. So kind of living in this like excessive forgiveness mindset. And so I still kept trying to find my worth in like other things, and being like socially accepted was a really big deal for me. And so things like partying, drinking, just anything I could to fit in, that's what I would do. They would never fully fully fulfill me. And I think it's easy to think that they will when you're living in that, and every weekend you're going out, you're partying, you're having fun, and that was huge. It was a way to have fun. And so when I would go to these parties and I would drink, or I would hang out with my friends and we would do whatever, it felt really good in the moment, and then it would wear off, and then you were back to living in a routine, and you were just looking forward to the weekend. Really, throughout high school, like my reading times would just be like Googling like passages of encouragement and like just going to read that chapter, or like going through a plan that the church I was going through had. My quiet time and allowing the Word to influence my lifestyle really started to happen in college, and building a consistent routine where I was just reading and allowing God to work through his words and work in my heart. So I think in college that started to change a lot. It has good advice in it, but this is truth. Like, this is the living, breathing Word of God. Like, this book is everything. Realizing that and realizing what that meant for my life. I have access to my Creator in my hands. Like, that is the most crazy gift I feel like we get as believers, is that we have this book, and not only do we have this book, but we also have the Spirit that helps us to read it and discern what is in it. And so realizing that too was big, of understanding that like I'm not just reading it just to read it and like, okay, I'm gonna make a note card, but I'm reading it to allow the Spirit to work in me and change me Now I have something that cannot be taken away by the most painful experiences of life, and getting to witness that throughout my college experience. I can look at myself every day in the mirror and just say, like, I'm loved today. I am strong. I am not afraid. I am washed by the blood of Jesus. I am made new each day. I am justified and I am sanctified, and I am completely a mess. Like, I am completely broken. I am sinful. I will mess up every single day, but I am loved beyond all measure. Just knowing that allows me to live my life free of these burdens that can weigh us down so much, of wanting to be accepted, of not knowing what is happening, not knowing what is coming next, and just all the weight of uncertainty that life can hold. I feel free of it every single day, because every day I wake up and God is there and He is inviting me into this life that He has so graciously given me, and that's just amazing. And I feel so blessed that I get to live this life knowing that this is just a fraction of what I'm going to taste when I get to heaven. Not that all of life is joyful and wonderful and beautiful. It holds a lot of pain and holds a lot of grief, but knowing God is right there with me, and knowing one day I'm going to be in eternity with Him, and there's not going to be any more pain, and there's not going to be any more grief, and it's going to be more than I can even think of words to describe right now. That is what gets me up out of bed every morning, knowing that that's what I'm living for and that's what I'm working towards. It's okay that I mess up, because God still loves me. One thing that I have just really been learning recently, you're never too far from God's reach. It doesn't matter what your situation is. It doesn't matter how far you feel like you've strayed, or how many mornings you haven't had quiet time, or it doesn't matter if you're not feeling God's closeness as much as you were during that one season where you were just really on fire. You're never too far out of God's reach. And that goes for the believers and the unbelievers who might be thinking, I can't give my life to God because I will never be enough for Him. That's just not true. It doesn't matter where you're going through. He is always there, and He's always shining, and His love is unfailing and with you every day. This is in a book that I read called The Well-Ordered Woman, and I feel like I've told this quote to like so many different people just because I love it, and I read it at a time where I really needed to hear it. And again, going back to like seasons in our faith, like just because you're at a low season doesn't mean God's not working and He's not there. And the quote, it was like, just because the sun isn't shining doesn't mean it's not there. So one day, like, the clouds are gonna part and you're gonna see that the sun was shining the whole entire time, even though you thought you were in complete darkness. As believers, there are going to be moments where we feel like we are in complete darkness, but that does not mean that God is not there. That does not mean He's not working, and that His love is not still surrounding us. And the warmth that He gives, and the comfort and the security, we're not still experiencing that. That's just been something on my mind. Like, every time I watch a sunrise, or every time it's raining outside, I think it's just this literal depiction of, it doesn't matter when life is hard. Like, it does matter. It sucks and it hurts and it's painful, but it does not take away from the fact that God is still shining and the sun's still there, even though we don't see it at the time. Just some encouragement that if anyone is going through a season of darkness, you're still loved, you still matter, just as much as you do on the mountaintops versus in the valleys. Yeah.